A bitter anniversary, remembering 9/11 at Ground Zero, the Pentagon, and in Pennsylvania. A national day of reflection 6 months later. Tonight, Twin Towers of Light, powerful symbols of renewal. Battle plans. The president challenges the world to join the war on terrorism. What are America's options? The charities. Billions raised, but is the money going to those who need it most? And healing the wounds, the emotional fallout, 6 months later, why some have recovered while others still grieve.
Attack on America, 6 months later. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw, reporting tonight from Ground Zero.
Good evening. 6 months after the September morning when America was attacked by terrorists using civilian airliners as guided missiles here at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon in Washington, the most serious attacks on this nation in its history, there were ceremonies of remembrance today and a strongly worded challenge to the world from President Bush at the White House.
Every nation should know that for America, the war on terror is not just a policy, it's a pledge. I will not relent in this struggle for the freedom and security of my country and the civilized world.
Today's ceremonies in Pennsylvania, where passengers forced a hijacked airliner to crash, at the Pentagon and here in New York, were marked with common themes of renewal and remembrance. Here at Ground Zero, the excavation and recovery work was put on hold for a time. It will be again this evening when the Twin Towers of Light are switched on. At the Pentagon, work on the devastated outer ring goes on tonight after daytime ceremonies honoring those who died there. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell joins me now on an anniversary of a terrible day. Kelly?
Tom, a newly dedicated plaque now sits in this wide-open Pennsylvania field, joining the many homemade memorials here to Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The memorials today began with the scope of this tragedy still so hard to grasp, now measured in months and remembered minute by minute as this day began in New York City. Today, a city resilient and reflective, mindful of both time's passing and the horror of moments locked in memory. 8:46 a.m., silence today marking that first impact. 17 minutes later, New York falling quiet again, remembering the attack of the second plane and the nearly 3,000 who perished at Ground Zero. But saved from the hell of 9/11, a symbol, a 45,000-pound sculpture from the World Trade Center Plaza, originally designed to stand for peace and prosperity, rededicated today.
The sphere may be damaged, but our belief in the principles it represents have never been stronger.
As New Yorkers paused and prayed, the nation's capital honored the 184 lives taken at the Pentagon. And at the White House, the president recalling that September Tuesday.
We remember the horror and heroism of that morning. The death of children on a field trip. The resistance of passengers on a doomed airplane.
The passengers remembered by Mr. Bush are names well known in tiny Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Or Todd Beamer of Cranbury, New Jersey.
Today, bells tolled at 10:06 a.m. and candles burned for each of the 40 passengers and crew of Flight 93 whose struggle against their hijackers ended here in a field, a place now marked by flowers and a mother's tears.
His father and I basically buried our son here.
And today, 2 more families said goodbye. Funerals held in New York City for a veteran police officer and rookie firefighter, finally laid to rest 6 months after their deaths. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Kelly O'Donnell tonight in Pennsylvania. Amid the remembrances today, the president and vice president were setting the stage for what could be the next big military action, a strike against Iraq. NBC's David Gregory is traveling with the vice president tonight as he begins his 10-day trip. David?
The president didn't mention Saddam Hussein's name, but he was undoubtedly on his mind as Mr. Bush pledged to target regimes stockpiling weapons of mass destruction.
Men with no respect for life must never be allowed to control the ultimate instruments of death.
Building a case for war against Saddam is the primary goal of the vice president's trip to London and the Middle East. Ridding Iraq of its weapons also apparently means toppling Saddam. U.S. officials say the vice president will tell coalition leaders that unlike the Gulf War, a new attack on Iraq would result in his downfall. But it's not clear America's allies are ready for all that just yet. Today, the British Prime Minister seemed to reflect Europe's unease.
The coalition that we have assembled has acted in a calm and a measured way, and this will continue.
America's hand against Saddam may be strengthened if Iraq again refuses an expected UN Security Council demand to allow this spring unrestricted inspections of his weapons stockpile. Still, there's the prickly issue of Arab reaction. Many leaders are expected to tell the vice president they are not prepared to support a mission against Iraq until the U.S. does more to end the violence between Israelis and Palestinians. Today, Mr. Cheney tried to head off new worries in the Arab world following revelations that the U.S. is studying the use of nuclear weapons against countries like Iraq, Syria, and Libya if they threaten the United States with weapons of mass destruction.
The notion that I've seen reported in the press that somehow this means we are preparing preemptive nuclear strikes against 7 countries, I'd say that's a bit over the top.
Nevertheless, the administration's saber-rattling over Iraq is meant to send a message. There may be no decision yet on how or when to attack Saddam, but his time is coming. David Gregory, NBC News, London.
Of course, the Bush administration already has a good deal on its agenda without Iraq. NBC Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon tonight with a status report on the action in Afghanistan and what could be next.
U.S. attack helicopters blast away today at enemy fighters dug deep into the Shahikat Mountains, where it's believed 2 major pockets of al-Qaeda forces still remain. It's estimated only a couple hundred al-Qaeda holdouts are here, but they may pose the biggest threat.
These terrorist fighters are the most committed, the most dangerous, and the least likely to surrender.
In fact, sources report more than 100 al-Qaeda may have slipped out of this combat zone to fight another day. And there's still no sign Osama bin Laden himself is here. But the U.S. military is already looking beyond Afghanistan. NBC News has learned that today about a dozen U.S. advisors are in Yemen, a haven for bin Laden terror camps. Sources report as many as several hundred American troops could ultimately get drawn into the fighting in Yemen as combat advisors. More than 500 U.S. troops are already in the Philippines, and U.S. trainers are on their way to the former Soviet Republic of Georgia to help wipe out al-Qaeda terror cells. But the Bush administration has its long-range sights set on Saddam Hussein. Like in Afghanistan, the U.S. plans to support opposition forces within Iraq, backed by American airstrikes. If necessary, the Pentagon also has plans to put 250,000 American troops on the ground. Some experts predict with the Iraqi military at 1/3 the strength it was during the Gulf War, the U.S. has more than enough firepower to topple Saddam.
We could do this essentially alone if we had to, with a little bit of help from some of our close allies in the region.
Sources report today that any U.S. military action against Iraq is at least a year away, and predict by then the Bush administration will have all the coalition support it needs. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Jim Miklaszewski tonight at the Pentagon. On Wall Street today, stocks closed narrowly mixed after last week's big run-up. The Dow finished up almost 39 points on the day. NASDAQ, however, was down, but just a fraction of a point. And late word tonight, David Letterman has decided to stay at CBS. He was being courted, of course, by ABC to replace Ted Koppel and Nightline, but he is renewing his contract at CBS. Up next, In Depth, billions in charitable donations to help the families of September 11th. But how much help are some of them really getting? Later, the emotional fallout from the terror attacks 6 months later. And for some, the pain still is too fresh. NBC News In Depth tonight, one of the most heartening developments in the aftermath of the terror attack 6 months ago, the massive outpouring of generosity from Americans coast to coast. Charities big and small, newly created and old line establishment took in staggering amounts of money to help the victims' families. However, as NBC's Ann Thompson tells us tonight, much of what has happened with all that money has been anything but heartening.
Go under again?
Little in the last 6 months has been easy for Liz McLaughlin, raising 15-month-old Nicholas alone. His father, her husband Rob, killed in the World Trade Center. She's contacted dozens of charities, but only one called her first, a small church in East Harlem.
I was astounded. This was in October. Other than that, I've had to call and call and call and call, as have many people.
But in Tribeca, a mile from Ground Zero, home to low-income housing projects and million-dollar apartments, the Red Cross went door to door, finding Betsy Byrne. Even though the novelist didn't lose a family member or a day of work, she got a $4,000 check.
I figured if they were going to give it to millionaires, I might as well have it too. I don't know. I can't rationalize it. I'm as bad as they are.
And that's just one source of outrage in the battle over how to distribute more than $2 billion in charity donated by more than half the country. The six-figure salaries proposed for executives of the Twin Towers Fund angered family members like Frank Dominguez, who lost his brother Jerome.
The idea that somebody now is going to use his name and use that sacrifice to make money for themselves is just obscene.
Now, instead of meeting long-term needs, the fund promises to give out the money quickly. Experts say the confusion and fighting could be crippling for charities.
I think we have a lot to learn from this in the future and in future disasters, and I'm very worried about how the public's going to take this.
As for the families, Danielle Salerno, mother to newborn Jack and a widow, worries that the true losses are forgotten in all the bickering.
It's not about money. It shouldn't be about money. I lost one person who was a million people to me. I lost the father of my child as well. How do you deal with that?
A question 3,000 families grapple with tonight, and the 180 charities trying to help. Ann Thompson, NBC News, New York.
And coming up in a moment, Katie Couric's conversations with the families of Flight 93. And still ahead, turning on the tribute of light, honoring the victims, 2 towers of light stretching toward the heavens. The enormous effort behind me to reclaim Ground Zero is well ahead of schedule tonight, and that can be easily measured in tons of debris moved and the quality of the air here. But 6 months after the attacks, the psychological fallout is much more difficult to gauge. Here's NBC's Bob Fall.
For Lorraine Foley and other relatives of victims, the horror of 9/11 is as real today as it was then. Since her firefighter son Jerry was killed at the World Trade Center, Lorraine has been in therapy.
A piece of me has been ripped out of my heart.
6 months later, there is still pain.
I should have gone before him. So it's just a very empty void.
Trauma experts worry that today's attention on 9/11 will reopen wounds which have barely healed.
In some ways, as the shock and the numbness wears off, people become more aware of what they're really carrying inside.
But the farther one goes from Ground Zero, not even 200 miles away in Easton, Maryland, the impact of 9/11 is much less.
There was about a 3-month period of time where, I was very depressed and kind of nervous and uncertain. And I think that by the beginning of January, that had lifted quite a bit.
Here, the rituals of life go on as before.
I don't think it's affected our everyday living as such.
And away from Ground Zero, attitudes are also getting back to normal. In October, 60% of Americans in one Gallup poll said they were very worried about more terrorist attacks. Now, that figure's fallen to 35%.
Church attendance, which had risen sharply, has returned to traditional levels.
When death is close at hand and when we're thinking about death, but it seems like spiritually we're going back to where we were.
In Easton, some things have changed. Residents agree patriotism has been revived and that there's a new mindset, a wariness.
We sort of have our antennas up, but yes, I think for the most part we have returned to normal.
Fear, for example, did not seem to affect the turnout at yesterday's food festival, nor was there extra security.
In the final analysis, we're able to come back and move ahead and do the things that we normally do.
Away from Ground Zero, they can. Closer, many still cannot. Bob Fall, NBC News, Easton, Maryland.
So much happened that day 6 months ago, including acts of great courage and sacrifice by ordinary people who were remembered today in rural Pennsylvania. Just before United Flight 93 crashed near Shanksville, a passenger's final words were heard over the phone from the airplane, "Let's roll." Now that's a rallying cry for the war on terror. And NBC's Katie Couric talked to the families of some of those passengers.
On the 6-month anniversary, as you think about your husbands and your son, what will you miss about them the most? What will you miss about Mark?
I'll miss his calling me up and saying, "Hey, Mom," or ending the conversation with saying, "I love you."
It's his laugh and it's his smile. I get those from Emerson because she looks just like him. She has his smile, she has his laugh.
I just remember being at a party or being out with friends and just always thinking in my head, I'm so glad that Todd's the one I'm going home with.
Each one of you had some kind of communication with your loved one while they were on that flight.
It's just I've never sensed such a sadness in his voice. And, you know, while the conversation is just so important to me, again, I'll always just remember, you know, that he was saying goodbye.
You didn't ask to necessarily become the face
No.
of this tragedy, did you? It just
No.
sort of happened.
It's not the life I would choose in any circumstance.
It's been sort of interesting in Mark's case, Alice. He was gay.
I'm pleased that the gay people in America have looked to Mark as one of them. He certainly was.
And a hero.
I'm so proud of the way he lived and proud of the way he died. I'm proud of all of them.
I'll be right back from Ground Zero, the tribute in light. They've yet to decide on a design for a permanent memorial here at Ground Zero, but tonight they will ignite twin towers of light that will symbolically replace the twin towers of the World Trade Center. The ceremony that's about to occur here at Ground Zero, and the lights will be switched on by a 12-year-old, Valerie Webb, who lost her father, a Port Authority policeman, on the day of the attack. That is Mayor Mike Bloomberg, the new mayor of New York City, who replaced Rudy Giuliani. Jesse Norman will also be part of the festivities, and the mayor, as we call him in New York, Rudy Giuliani,
Good
there on the
evening.
far left of your screen,
I would like to
with the governor, of
introduce
course,
Valerie
Governor
Webb.
Pataki.
Her father, Nathaniel Webb, was a Port Authority police officer who was lost on September 11th. Valerie is going to illuminate the tribute in light in memory of her father and all of those that we lost on that fateful day. Following that, world-renowned soprano Jesse Norman will sing America the Beautiful. Valerie?
America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood. From sea to shining sea.
As we watch all of this evening, I talked with former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who was such a powerful force personally, politically, and psychologically for the city following 9/11, and I asked him about his memories of that first awful day.
The evening starts to come back, the concern about getting the floodlights here. Thinking that first night that we were going to be able to recover large numbers of people. So I wanted to make sure all the floodlights were in place so the men could work all night, and had the hospitals open, kept them open all night. And then the terrible disappointment the next day when we weren't recovering anyone. So many memories come back. The people that I saw for the last time standing over here, right out in front here.
By the next day, Mayor, or not too long after that, this city began to rise from the ashes. Flags began to fly. Your strong voice was an important part of that. The president found his own voice. There was a sense of renewal that began almost immediately.
Yeah, I thought it started when the firefighters put the flag up that very first day, right up there. And when this place was burning with 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and any one of them could have been killed by anything falling on them. They put the flag up, and the president came here on Friday, again in danger when he was here, and spent an hour and a half hugging the men and talking to them. And I thought that from that point on, the spirit of America was revived.
Will you ever have another experience in your life that will in any way measure up to this one as the mayor of the city when that happened?
I hope not. I hope nobody ever has an experience like this again. I mean, it was the worst, most horrible day in the history of this city, maybe country, and it was the greatest and most glorious day in our history, and I hope we never have to repeat anything like this again.
Former Mayor Rudy Giuliani. The demolition and recovery work here at Ground Zero has gone so well and so swiftly. To the unknowing, this site could very well appear to be just another urban renewal project at the lower end of Manhattan, where New York first took hold as a city more than 300 years ago. To those who lived through 9/11, it is, of course, an open wound that cannot be healed in just 6 months, and however long it takes, it will leave a scar, a lasting and instructive reminder that this country at the peak of its power was America the beautiful, but also America the vulnerable. But tonight, the enduring lesson is that the strength of America went well beyond its tall buildings, its great wealth, and its good times. That's Nightly News for this Monday. I'm Tom Brokaw. Remember,